Dinosaurs and the prehistoric world at large have long held a cross-cultural appeal. We all wonder at some point or another what life was like in a time before ourselves, and the Earth has provided just enough bits and pieces to reveal some of the mysteries of our past. As a young boy going through the dinosaur phase every kid experiences at some point, one particular mystery started to pop up in my head that really hasn't gone away. See, paleontology, evolutionary biology, and other such fields of study are typically thought of and depicted as dominated by white men, with perhaps one or two notable exceptions. Of course, these sciences, or at least their modern incarnations, have roots in Western Europe and later spread throughout the world with the imperialist systems of the 19th and 20th centuries, so it's not a surprise that many of its giants hail from this cultural background and form the basis for how we imagine someone who studies the ancient past. But how many overlooked or altogether forgotten names are in these fields that don't fit the typical image of the Victorian gentleman or the rugged American explorer? The science has been, and still is, becoming increasingly global, so where exactly are the people from the rest of the globe? These big picture questions may or may not lead into its own full-fledged series, but for this video anyway, I want to shine my small spotlight on a person whose story I only recently learned of when I finally took my long-held mystery to the internet and asked Google, where are the black paleontologists? Louis Rayfield Purnell was born on April 5, 1920 in Snow Hill, Maryland, although his family moved to Wilmington, Delaware when he was 2 years old. His parents, Louis and Matilda, were both school teachers and instilled the value of learning and education in their children from an early age, which young Louis would take to heart and follow throughout his life. Like many other black families, the Purnells came upon particularly hard times when the Great Depression hit in 1929. Even the extra work the elder Louis took on as an industrial railway painter was proving insufficient to support his growing family. The family caught a bittersweet break in 1933 when they inherited a 10-acre plot of land in Cape May, New Jersey from Purnell's uncle upon his passing, allowing them the ability to grow their own food. The move also afforded young Louis new opportunities to flourish, though not without hindrances. Cape May was a mostly white town but didn't have legally segregated schools, so Louis was able to attain a quality of education that was not commonly available to black students due to the United States' failure to fulfill the purported ideals of its separate but equal doctrine. An avid learner, he excelled in high school and developed an aptitude for science-related topics, though when he ultimately graduated near the top of his class with high honors, he was told by his teachers that he only got by on the skin of his teeth. Reflecting on this in his later years, Louis came to realize,
"You had to be twice as good to appear equal to white people, and from that day forward, in all of my endeavors, I've always remembered that."
outside of school, Louis pursued other passions. On most afternoons, he rode his bike over to the local airport, Cape May Air Station, to watch the planes take off and land. He was fascinated at the concept of being a pilot, and eventually even talked himself onto the airfield, offering to clean the hangars just so he could get a closer look at the planes and marvel at their underlying tech. His curiosity in the natural world and interest in aviation would both be major elements in Louis's life, leading him to get a private pilot's license within his first year at Pennsylvania's Lincoln University alongside his studies in psychology. Germany invaded Poland mere months after he started college, and when the United States ultimately entered World War II in 1941, Purnell applied to join the Air Force upon hearing the call for black pilots as part of a new training program based in Tuskegee, Alabama. The intensity and rigor of the program was not at all helped by living in the racism of the Jim Crow South, but in July of 1942, now Captain Purnell graduated and was commissioned as one of the early members of the 99th Fighter Squadron, more famously known as the Tuskegee Airmen. From there, he went on to fly a total of 88 combat missions over the skies of Europe and North Africa across 2 tours of service, becoming one of the squadron's longest-serving members and earning both the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal with 6 oak leaf clusters. Despite their service, sacrifice, and accolades, Purnell and other black military service people returned to an America that continued to disregard their humanity. Purnell was just one of many to echo the tragically enduring sentiment.
"We fought 2 wars, one with the enemy and the other back home in the USA. Race was like a brick wall everywhere you went."
After the war ended, he turned down the offer of a military career and returned to civilian life, finishing his college degree in psychology at Lincoln University in 1947 and moving to Washington, D.C. to begin graduate work in speech therapy at Howard University. Unable to finish this due to the new responsibilities of starting his own family, he worked various government jobs over the course of the next decade, aiming to work his way up into a secure, long-term position. His first job was at the U.S. Postal Service, which he left after only a year.
When you look at the jobs or the work that's done in the post office, it's the same thing over and over and over. You can make strides, but there's no variety. It's the same humdrum thing. And I wanted to get out and do something in other fields.
He then worked in the office of the Quartermaster General for about 3 years, where he worked to identify the remains of U.S. soldiers killed during World War II and the Korean War, which he found to be much more his speed.
That was very interesting, and I think I was hired there because of my background in science, anatomy, physics, chemistry, plus the fact that I had had flying experience. And those terms used in some of the disappearances of aircraft crews would be totally familiar to me. And I could teach others. I could teach others about which bones were found and their relation to the entire skeleton. It was a job that I fitted very well.
Even though he, as the only black person in his section of the office, was occasionally openly resented by his supervisor, Elizabeth McDermott, when he corrected her terminology, it wasn't what made him leave the job.
I left Quartermaster because they had a shift in employment. They turned all the processors into a section called Equipage, where you did nothing but use a calculator to add and subtract, and that just wasn't my bag.
He then worked at the U.S. Book Exchange for about 7 years, followed by an attempt to become an air traffic controller, which was also impeded by racist attitudes. Finally, in the late 1950s, he started working as a guard at the National Gallery of Art, which ultimately led to his working in the Smithsonian's Division of Invertebrate Paleontology in 1961.
I applied for a position of a guard to be transferred to natural history and come up through their ranks. Someone who was a good friend of the captain of the guard over there heard him say that he didn't want any uppity niggers in his position. So he passed the application back to personnel. They notified me and asked if I would put in an application as a specialist in paleontology, and I did. I was accepted immediately. It was a temporary job, as all jobs in the Smithsonian are initially until you prove yourself. Then you become permanent. They sent me a telegram saying, "This is a temporary position, not to exceed, I think, 6 months." I didn't look at that part of the telegram. The only thing I could see was the temporary position, because I had a feeling that if I just got my foot in the door, that I'd make it a point to make good. I was mighty grateful for that position being open.
The position in question was a curatorial aide to the newly appointed Dr. Earl Kaufman in the Paleozoic mollusk collection at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. The day-to-day work largely involved cleaning, cataloging, and realphabetizing over 4,250 remains of various ancient cephalopods, as well as occasionally doing the same for another collection that contained another 4,000 or so cephalopod specimens from the Mesozoic. Working with such fossils proved to require much patience and innovation.
Some of the specimens were so small that it was impossible to number them. I devised a method of putting on a small, invisible coating on the pages, glue, so that when I numbered them, the ink would not penetrate to the specimen. I used 2 sable hairs and India ink, and I could get a 7-digit number on a specimen that was no bigger than the 1/2 inch in diameter, or maybe 1/4 inch, and it was amazing. It was something that had never been tried before, and the number would stay on there. It wouldn't penetrate the specimen. It wouldn't disfigure the specimen, and then I'd enter it into their catalog. In studying these fossils, I found out that several were missing. That occurred in a lot of publications. Missing, missing, missing. I don't know what led me to the attic of the Natural History Building, but one day while roaming around up there, it's just like anyone's attic at home. You find things up there that aren't being used and have been discarded. And I discovered some very important prototypes of fossils, of nautiloids, that had been up there for years, but had been listed as missing. I dusted them off and brought them down, put them in the collection, made out new labels for them, and I said, I'll make a catalog.
For those unfamiliar, a catalog in this case is basically a book listing all of the specimens in a given collection. What Purnell meant by prototypes is known in technical biological terms as the holotype, aka the individual specimen that is chosen to be the official name-bearing representative of a species. Usually it's the first specimen to have actually been found and collected by researchers, though that's not always the case, and so becomes the standard to which all future specimens are compared to determine if they share enough features with the original to be considered as a member of that species. This is one of the most common ways to identify new species, and forms the basis for figuring out how different species are related to each other, and having a proper catalog for a museum's collection is crucial to its function as a research institution. A museum has to know exactly what it has so that researchers can efficiently and accurately find the specimens they're looking to study when they either visit the museum itself or request to loan something for study at their own research facility. Considering that natural history museums often collect fossils and other specimens at a rate faster than they are properly cataloged, and the Smithsonian's invertebrate paleontology collections alone had grown from about 11,500 specimens to well over 200,000 since the previous catalog had been published in 1905, it's clear that a new, massively updated catalog was in order. As someone who has spent most of my academic or professional career so far doing this sort of work on the more charismatic fossil animals like dinosaurs and other prehistoric celebrities, I can attest that you really have to be a certain type of person to want to take on such a task. Fortunately, Purnell was just that type of person.
I had always been curious about my surroundings, the land, the sea, and the air. My experience as a combat pilot gave me all the experience in the air. I mean, you know about the atmosphere, you know about the storms, this, that, and the other, and I'm still curious. Joining the Smithsonian, I didn't know it then, but that fulfilled the other 2/3 of my curiosity. In geology or paleontology, you are shown what is in the earth, and it's amazing when you go back millions of years and you can find a fossil, hold it in your hand and say, this thing was living millions of years ago, and you're holding the remains of it in your hand to study what inhabited the earth way back there. I was fascinated by it, and I selected a specialty, nautiloids, and I wanted to publish a catalog on it. They were beautiful things, and just to look at them and see how they were formed and try to find the perfect cephalopod with all of its features, perfect features. You know, some specimens were eroded and whatnot, and I was looking for the best representation. It's fascinating.
We'll return to what became of the catalog in a little while, as that ended up being a nearly 7-year project that Purnell worked on largely in his spare time, facing academic and racial prejudices along the way from some of his colleagues and other museum faculty. Still, he was able to explore a variety of other topics outside of his job's immediate work.
I felt that there was a division. I saw no signs of it, but certain things you can feel. And if we were going to all work together, be it black, white, blue, yellow, or green, your part in being a specialist or an aide was just as important as their part. And you worked together for the benefit of the organization. I made it a point to become acquainted with them, because each person has something to... They were knowledgeable, and the work was interesting. And each person had something to contribute. Larry Isham was the illustrator for the whole department over there, and I became interested in it. I'm always having my nose stuck into someone else's business if it appears interesting to me. So Larry said, look, come on over once a week, and there are things that you can do, and you can learn illustrating on the side. I learned to use the tools. Larry set the lettering instruments that he had there, and then we gradually worked into illustrating by looking into the microscope and actually drawing the specimens that I saw. That was very interesting. He taught me the process of shading. He taught me how to sharpen up images. And looking at some of his work, which is just miraculous, I tried to emulate it. I have downstairs in my scrapbook some of my first illustrations that I did for him. And I must say that they're good. That was just another way of broadening. I think they were actually testing to see if I could do other things than what I was doing. I even went to the man who worked on dinosaur bones, and I would hold conversations with him. Each person in that section, and the section was large, I would make it a point to know what was going on, because it always looked like they were doing interesting things, and I was curious and I wanted to know about them.
Purnell's curiosity-driven wanderings weren't limited to within the walls of the Smithsonian. Dr. Kaufman occasionally went on fossil hunting expeditions to nearby states to locate more specimens for his own research, and Purnell would often accompany him on these trips. As you can imagine, given that this was 1960s civil rights era America, things didn't always go smoothly.
We went to Calvert Cliffs one day, and there's a certain portion of Calvert Cliffs below the water line where we were free to go. Further back up towards the land is owned by private people on that beach. We were out collecting fossils at Calvert Cliffs, and a man came up and told Earl Kaufman, "I'm very sorry," he said, "but I earn my living from renting space on this beach and letting people come in and hold parties and swimming on my beach. I can't have this. I'm an arrested tubercular patient, and I make my living off charging admissions to this portion of the beach that I own." Earl said, "We're out beyond the water line, and that doesn't belong to anyone." He said, "Yes, but you have to cross my beach to get out to the water line." Earl said, "What's your objection?" He said, "Well, if they see him," meaning me, "on this beach, they'll think that colored people are allowed to come on this beach, and they themselves," meaning the whites, "won't come. I can't have this." So Earl Kaufman, who was a PhD, seemed to be a bit perplexed, and I stepped in and did something that I shouldn't have done. But in that moment of anger, I told him, "Well, it looks like each of us has his troubles. You are an arrested tubercular patient, and I'm black. If we would get head to head, you figure out who would catch what from whom. Meaning, would he become black, or would I catch his disease?" Immediately, Earl turned his back, and I followed him, and I left the man dangling. He went away from his portion of the beach, further down shore, and we didn't cross his area coming back to the car. We went way down the beach to another house that was on the shore there. Went up to the house and knocked on the door and asked for permission to cross their beach or to pick fossils from the outcrop of the cliff. We explained the incident, and the woman said, "I don't care whether you're blue, black, yellow, white, or green. My section of the beach is open to you. There's only one stipulation. Don't leave any beer cans on the beach." And we thanked her profusely and went on and collected our specimens for Earl Kaufman's collection.
Purnell's tenure in the paleontology division also included more than just fossil hunting and cataloging. In the mid-1960s, he was selected on multiple occasions to represent the division on the high seas as well.
I went on several oceanographic expeditions, leaving out of Woods Hole, Massachusetts, on a boat. Our research vessel, Chain. We went to all different parts of the Atlantic, the mid-Atlantic ridge. We took samples of sediment from the ocean bottom. We brought in sea creatures. It was very interesting. We stayed out at sea, I think it was for about a month. Then we came back, and I went on another oceanographic expedition. which left from Woods Hole again and went down to South America, off the coast of South America. Again, we gathered sediment and sea creatures, and we finally skirted the South Pole, the continent there. And from there we left and went over to New Zealand. That was the end of our trip. 6 weeks. Each person had to have a little project, specific duties, and they were well chosen, selected. Now, when you weren't tending your own duties, they had different, what they call watches, almost like a Navy ship. You were given an explanation of all the scientific instruments, and you had to tend the graphs. On certain graphs, they would make a record. A needle would go across a piece of paper, say, charting the ocean bottom, and you would be there watching that and changing the paper. If anything went wrong, you'd know what was wrong from having been instructed before. Then you would have a watch on the hydrophones. As we traveled through the water, we would listen for different sounds, whales or whatnot. And when we were on station, that's when we were standing still. You'd do approximately the same thing. But we took over some of the duties that were rather scientific, that we were not familiar with, so we could fulfill some of the duties and purposes on the ship. It was very interesting. I was interested in finding what went on other people's projects. And instead of sleeping and passing my time doing nothing, I'd go around to different scientists and see what they were doing and how they did their work and why they did this, that, and the other. After the expedition was over, the chief scientist wrote a letter to Cifelli commending him on his choice of sending me. He said, "The only fault I have to find that Lou Purnell would not on his time off take advantage of it by sleeping. He was up on the deck, seeing what was going on with everyone else."
Of course, even on a ship sailing in waters far from America, the same old bigotry reared its head.
There was a kid from Boston. He said he was from Quincy, and I mispronounced it, Quincy. That offended him. Then, secondly, he said, "Can't you people learn to talk right? You people." He had a very interesting, I forget what his assignment was. I began to ask him questions. He threw his pencil down on the desk and he said, "What the hell are you doing? Writing a book or something? Get out of here." One day in the mess hall, there was only one seat that was vacant, and that was alongside of me at breakfast. We tarried a while after we would eat breakfast, if we didn't have to go to our different stations. And he stood there the whole time rather than sit alongside of me. He came over to me and asked me when the hell was I going to leave? When was I going to get up so he could sit down? Now, there was an empty space alongside of me, and rather than come and sit down and eat alongside of me, he stood up.
Still, Purnell looked at the experience fondly.
I got to see a good bit of the sea and the experiments carried on at sea. So while at the Museum of Natural History, sea and land was added to my curiosity about the air. So it fulfilled a lot of my curiosity. That I'm thankful for.
While he was doing all of this, Purnell worked on his fossil cephalopod catalog. It's worth restating that this was a project that he took on his own volition. Though an extension of his usual work at the museum, the project was largely done outside the Smithsonian on his own spare time.
I was talking to Dr. Cooper before I started this work, and he said, "You're going to find that you pull out an identification card from a specimen box, and it's going to refer to a publication where these specimens were referred to or photographed or treated. Get every one of those publications that you can." I got a shoebox and every publication that would say, "This specimen is in the Smithsonian collection." I had to verify it by going to the collection and picking that out. So I had to do a lot of research, get all those publications together, and they proved well. because not only did they feature that one specimen, there were others in there that I had in my collection, and under his guidance, that was a good suggestion. You verify the specimens by comparing the photo with the specimen that you're holding in your hand, and a lot of them were incorrect. Very similar but not identical to the specimens you had. They referred to the same catalog number, which was sometimes wrong, quite often wrong. But you get rather deep in it. It becomes fascinating to do that detective work and prove whether they're right or wrong. Very fascinating.
As I alluded to earlier, this venture drew the ire of some of his colleagues and other staff members, some rooted in academic or professional jealousy, others of course stemming from the perceived threat of a black man coming in and doing this level of work, though the latter rarely manifested itself in such a blatant way. In academia, racism often comes in more subtle forms.
Well, I was told, you don't have a degree. You have to get a degree in geology. You can't publish any catalog because you won't know what you're doing. I think there was a big to-do or meeting or conversation about the catalog being published under my name when I didn't have a degree. But I did all the work. I found out what was necessary to do, and I did it for publishing that catalog. I had found out my format, how each specimen was to be entered. I did a lot of research on the publication of the catalog itself, and then it was turned over to the Smithsonian Institution Press. I had done this whole catalog on 3x5 cards at home and had turned it over to a typist with specific instructions as to how the format should go or what were the requirements and format for the catalog. They didn't know that I was getting this catalog together, alphabetizing the types, and when that was known, I had been told before, if you get this catalog out, you'll write your own ticket. Well, nothing was forthcoming. But when that catalog was published, everybody that could legitimately be entered in the foreword of that catalog jumped on board. They had nothing to do with it, under the supervision of, I think there were 1, 2, 3, 4 people that claimed to have supervised. I have to read the foreword again, but I did that thing at home. The only thing they directed me was to whom I should forward this thing after I had it completed. And I used Dr. Keir's secretary to type up all this stuff. And the funny thing about that, I block print, and a large letter means a capital, and a small half space means lowercase. Rosa Moore was very partial. She resented my coming in as an aide and working up to a professional, something that she would love to have done because she was a school teacher. When I gave her all these things, I put them on a paper rather than have her to type them from the cards, and she looked at the papers and threw them in the trash basket. She said that she couldn't discern one. She didn't use the word discern, meaning that she couldn't discern one capital in block printing from a lowercase. And it hurt me. I stood right there and looked at it, all that work, and I told Boardman. I think he talked to her. And she did it, but there again, she was black. Oh boy, the trials and tribulations.
Purnell's work was ultimately published in 1968 under the title Catalog of the Type Specimens of Invertebrate Fossils, and covers well over 4,000 specimens from 4 major families: the ammonoids, bactricoids, coeloids, and of course, Purnell's beloved nautiloids. The title page and introduction, written by Boardman, both allude to this being the first of an entire series that would cover the whole of the invertebrate fossil collections, but Purnell's work remains one of the few that were ever actually published and remain in use to this day. The only other publication in this particular series that I could find is from Frederick Collier, a fellow museum aide of Purnell who was working on his master's thesis at the time.
He and I didn't get along very well together. I don't think I was offensive by any means. I tried everything I could think of to get along with him. I never did see him catalog any, but he whipped up this idea of cataloging his collection when he heard that I was.
Despite his 7 years' worth of work for the collection, Purnell did not stay in paleontology beyond 1968, moving to the Smithsonian's newly rebranded National Air and Space Museum at a time that coincided with the advent of the space race and the United States' first manned mission to the moon in 1969.
I decided to leave paleobiology because, as they had promised me, once you get your catalog together, you can write your own ticket. Well, I think a considerable length of time passed, and I didn't hear anyone saying anything about any promotion. A considerable length of time, meaning 6, 8 months. They had a reorganization, and I said, well, maybe after reorganization is over, I'll get my promotion. But nothing was said. Then again, that old feeling of flying. If you can't fly, I just wanted to be around or associated with some organization that dealt with aircraft. And I thought to myself, well, this is going to grow. This Air and Space Museum is going to grow by leaps and bounds. Why not get in on the ground floor? Meanwhile, Fred Collier, who was a Bostonian, he began to show signs of jealousy because I had published a catalog and he had not. He made it rather tough for me. That's when I put in my application for the Air and Space Museum, with much apologies to Porter Keir and to Richard Boardman, because they told me, no, you stay here. They became very angry when they knew that I was moving. I didn't let them know until I had been accepted in the Air and Space Museum that I was moving. It was always my belief that you don't telegraph your punches. We learned that in boxing. You don't tell anyone what you're going to do. And then again, it's like climbing a ladder. You make sure that you have the rung above you in hand before you release the lower one. And the same with your feet. I wanted to make sure I had that position just about secured before I told them that I was leaving.
Purnell would spend the next nearly 2 decades at the National Air and Space Museum, eventually becoming the Smithsonian's first black curator before retiring in 1985. During that period, he facilitated the museum's acquisition of thousands of artifacts from across aerospace history, including space material both from NASA itself, as well as the various companies that designed the technology used in the early years of the space program, from scientific instruments and lunar samples to spacesuits and spacecraft, including the Apollo 11 command module Columbia, which brought the first humans to the moon and was the only spacecraft from that historic mission to actually return to Earth. Purnell also advocated for the representation of African Americans' contributions to aviation history, which, despite much hesitancy and pushback from various members of the Smithsonian's higher-ups, eventually culminated in the permanent Black Wings exhibit that opened in 1983. After his retirement in '85, he remained associated with the Smithsonian as a consultant and outreach educator.
Becoming a curator made me feel that my efforts had paid off. I don't necessarily want to be having my picture posted as being a curator, but it was gratifying to see that some of my ideas were incorporated, and the fact that it was an exciting place to work made it an enjoyable experience. I didn't care whether that title is just a title, but it is a result of having put forth effort and having proven yourself. It was gratifying, and yet at times it was sort of embarrassing because they would classify you as one of the first black curators, and here he is. That's like putting a price tag on you just before an auction. I don't approve of that. Inwardly, I have a great feeling of accomplishment. And I think in life, that's one of the most important things, that feeling of accomplishment. Whether anyone knows it or not, you can look in the mirror and say you have done it, just as though you would look in the mirror and say you have failed. But in this case, I think, not resting on my laurels or anything, but I feel good about what I've done. There were rocky times and obstacles and things I had to fight. But that's life, isn't it? You overcome those things and go on to the next thing.
Lewis Purnell lived a rich life, driven by his passions and curiosity. A life which, to truly cover in full, would result in a much longer video, but hopefully I've been able to do his story at least a little justice. As one of the first and few historical figures who appears when you go looking for black paleontologists, the fact that his life story has only been chronicled by the Smithsonian and isn't more widely known is surprising, though not unexpected. My only hope is that this video will help change that, and more importantly, provide someone out there with as much inspiration as it gave and gives me. Shortly before his death from cancer in 2001, Purnell was asked by an interviewer from the Smithsonian about his views on racial progress in paleontology and whether he felt that things had improved by the turn of the century.
I cannot say that things have gotten better from my point of view, because I never stopped to take inventory from my position. That blockage of prejudice, that barricade, that hurdle was always there. You jump one hurdle, and then the next one. You look forward to the next one. I hope, having been employed, or I'll say they're having hired me, or given me a chance to prove myself, I hope that they've observed what I have done, and I hope that I've broken down those barriers of prejudice. And if they can only look back and say, well, we had one here, Lou Purnell, and he did all right. Let's take a chance on the other one, looking at their qualifications and interviewing them face to face and seeing their attitudes. I hope so, just as we knocked down the barriers in military aviation. I hope that if there's just one person who gets through and who is helped by my efforts, I think I've succeeded. I hope so.